Well, hello, everybody. I think I know just about everybody here. It's good to see you again, and welcome to all of those of you who are new to this. I'm Brian Lovell. I've been coming out here, I guess, since 2010, and Ted and I were talking about that last night. It's almost 10 years of coming out here, even before the Best Center started. But I'm one of the co-PIs from Georgia Piedmont Technical College, and so for those of you who aren't familiar, that's one of the institutions, as is UC Berkeley, Manhattan Area Technical College, and Milwaukee Area Technical College in Milwaukee, Ted's institution. And what we've contributed to the Best Center is largely our building automation systems curriculum for our associate's degree program. Some of you have taken a look at that content and hopefully made good use of it. We've had a lot of great workshops over the years, and one thing that keeps coming to mind is coming to light as one of the feedback items is we want a collective of lessons and or exercises that students can do together, and we've never quite gotten there. But this workshop, we're going to lean on you and provide you some resources to help us build some of that out. So what we'll do first is present the basics of PBL, which is problem or project-based learning. Then we'll provide some resources which we've disseminated previously, and then some new resources that we pulled down. And then we'll ask you to engage with us to build some lessons, a project-based or problem-based lesson. And the intent is at the end of this workshop that we'll have a collection of lessons that we can put up on Google Drive, and any of you can pull down and use at your institutions. So as we start this, I'd like to first ask the question, I heard a lot of building automation systems focused folks here. Are there any sustainability minded or focused individuals here attending, or energy focused, or some other field? Okay, so we've got what, sustainability, energy? Okay, how about you? Energy, okay. And I know you're all over the place, so. Okay, so we'll give you some options as we go forward, and hopefully we'll get some lessons built out, obviously in building automation, but also in sustainability, energy, maybe commissioning, if some of you are interested in that, et cetera. So any questions about that before we get started, or comments? Okay. So what we'll talk about first this morning is project-based learning and what constitutes good project-based learning. How many of you attended the workshop at Metropolitan Community College last summer? Okay. Did you find the exercise there engaging and useful for you? Okay. That's a good example of a really complex problem-based learning exercise which we put together for that workshop. We're going to try to lay out the differences between problem-based and project-based learning, and then leave it to you if you'd like to develop a project-based learning activity or a problem/project-based learning hybrid kind of exercise, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless, whichever one you choose, it takes a lot of planning and upfront work by the instructor. But the payoff is, at the end, you get better learning outcomes, and you get a more engaged body of students. For those of us who've done this before, we know that to be true. And typically, once you've built it out to a point that you're comfortable with, you have an exercise that you can use again and again and improve, and it becomes easier on the instructor, actually. That's been my experience with it. So let's get into some project-based learning fundamentals, and then use the Metropolitan, I keep wanting to call it Omaha Community College, but Metropolitan Community College exercise that we did, and how that bespeaks a good practice in problem-based learning construction. Okay. So what we'll do today, from now until 11 o'clock approximately, is we'll do an overview of project or problem-based learning, PBL. We'll review and discuss the design of the Metropolitan Community College workshop we did last year. And then we'll have some other presentations. And after lunch, from 2:15 to 2:45, we'll go through the project-based learning exercise that we want to engage you in. And we'll provide a template and go through the template and explain the things that we'd like to see. And there's quite a bit in there, so hopefully everybody will be engaged throughout the exercise. And then the goals and report format that you will present along the way and at the end of the workshop on Friday, actually. And then we'll leave it to you to get into work groups for those areas that you're interested in, maybe energy or building automation, whatever it is, work groups of 3 to 4, maximum 4. And hopefully you can get together with somebody who's designed or been an instructor or designed lessons before, for those of you who have not done that before, so that you can kind of learn from your group as well. So we'll try to pair you off in that way as we go through. And then you'll start designing your exercise and report your progress at 4:30 today on some of the elements of that PBL design. Okay. So as we get into this, there was a good report done. It was way back in 1983, actually, but it started in 1981, and it was set up by the Secretary of Education back then, and it was called A Nation at Risk. It was done by the National Commission on Excellence in Education. It was formed with the charter to examine the quality of education in the United States at that time. And mind you, this is 35 years ago. The Secretary of Education at that time was concerned about the widespread public perception that something is seriously remiss in our educational system. And I have this with you. I can circulate it after the presentation if you're interested in reading it. He said there's a growing chasm between, or this is what they found, there's a growing chasm between small scientific technological elite and a citizenry ill-formed, indeed uninformed, on issues with a science component. That was one of the outcomes of the study in 1983 when it was published. It also found that more and more young people are emerging from high school neither ready for work or for college. Does this sound familiar? This predicament becomes more acute as the knowledge base continues its rapid expansion, the number of traditional jobs shrink, and new jobs demand greater sophistication and preparation. All that could be written today, almost 36 years later, only to a more acute level. That's why I bring it to your attention. We conclude that declines in the educational performance are in large part the result of disturbing inadequacies in the way the educational process itself is conducted. Again, this could be written today. The findings were categorized into 4 aspects of the educational process. And they were the content of educational materials, the expectations in the classroom, the time that students spend engaged in classroom activity or in homework, and then the teaching itself. And their findings under each category was that the content was homogenized, diluted, and diffused to the point that they no longer serve a central purpose. The expectations of students, the academic rigor had been reducing and grades were inflating. The time that American students spend on homework does not compare with that of other nations. And there's inadequate use or ineffective use of classroom time and inadequate study skill development. And then the teaching side, teacher preparation was inadequate. Top students were not pursuing careers in education. They were overworked and underpaid, and there was a shortage of teachers as well. 1983, all this was written. Yes, John. Both. The charter was to take a look at particularly middle and high school, and then community college, had a real focus on community college and vocational education as well. So it ran the gamut, okay? And I'll circulate that so you can take a look at it shortly. Obviously, that report could have been written today with nearly identical findings. So what are the implications 35 years after that with the environment virtually the same in education, the problems virtually the same? Well, from an employer's perspective, it's well documented that there's an acute need for high-quality workers, particularly in technical fields. As I heard a lot of you talking about and introducing yourself and what you do, a lot of you mentioned that you're starting new programs in building automation in particular. That's a direct result of a need in the employment sector for people in your region to find people with those technical skills, and that's just one of, well, God knows how many. There's a desire for employees who can think, communicate, and solve problems. This continues to be a finding today. We can't find enough prospective employees who can think or solve problems. I was, for a large part of my career, a contractor, a controls contractor, and I was just desperate for people who could think or solve problems and take pressure off of me from getting out in the field and trying to to take care of issues. And I know a lot of you are HVAC contractors. How many of you would like people who can think or solve problems or analyze, right? I mean, this continues to be a huge problem in the United States. So as a result, there has been an increase, at least anecdotally from what I'm hearing and seeing, in in-house training and apprenticeship programs. But as Peter mentioned in his remarks, this is not going to solve the problem, right? Apprenticeships are great, in-house training is great, but people who are in the field are not educators like we're educators, and there's a gap there between what they can do and what really needs to be done with our workforce. And there's high mobility of workers in the technical fields and inflated salaries. And I think we all realize that as well. Now, on the collegiate side, what implications of an ill-prepared group of high school students coming into colleges, what implications does that hold for colleges? And I've seen this as well. As an instructor for 6 years at GPTC, I've seen this, even in that short amount of time, I've seen these problems actually get worse and worse. Lower percentage of students ready for collegiate level work. More students with learned helplessness in the classroom, a static versus a growth mindset perspective. Feed me, feed me, feed me. What are the answers? What do I need to do to make an A? How many times have we heard that? Tell me what I need to know to get out of this class. Yeah, right, exactly. And if you want to learn more about that, Carol Dweck is the national expert on growth mentality and mindset, and that's a very interesting read. But we're almost fostering that perspective from K-12 on that in students' minds that they need to be served, right, instead of thinking for themselves or being independent thinkers or active learners. A reduction in the motivation of students, less focus, and this has a number of probably reasons, the least of probably one of them being the cell phones and instant entertainment and instant gratification. So we could talk about that all day. So colleges are under pressure, I think we could agree, to find new ways to engage students, to motivate students to learn, resulting in some of these initiatives in higher education that we've probably all seen if you've been in education for any amount of time, the focus on student engagement, right? How do we engage students and keep them at the institutions, keep them interested, and get them to graduate? The focus on the 4 C's, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity. The 4 C's, the 21st century skills, which really is just a new casting of skills that we've always needed, but need them more now in a rapidly changing economy than ever. More applied-based instructional strategies, and the use of innovative instructional methods and modalities reaching students where they are, right? So is there a teaching strategy or style that has been shown to address all these? Well, yeah, obviously, project-based learning. That's the nature of this presentation. Project or problem-based learning, PBL can stand for both, is a proven pedagogical approach which promotes that 21st century skill development, retention, and improved learning outcomes. The definition, and this is my definition, so it might not be the best, but I like to think of project-based learning as an immersive instructional method whereby students create unique public work products through collaborative, active learning in pursuit of a problem, question, or challenge. And this is going to be the nature of what we develop over the course of the next 3 days together. Okay. And that's, by the way, somebody who engaged at that at GPTC in our conference center when we did some of this a few years back, presenting some of his public work products of his project. So first of all, let's talk about the differences between problem-based and project-based learning. And Peter and I and Ted were talking about this yesterday. There's a lot of variability here, so it's not hard and fast, but these are typically the differences between the two. Problem-based learning, students and teachers will share the learning goals and the outcomes at the beginning or outset of the problem. Whereas in project-based learning, it's a little bit more open-ended. The goals of the project will be shared, but the learning outcomes are somewhat nebulous because different students pursuing different projects are going to learn some different things along the way. Under problem-based learning, provide multiple routes of solutions, methods to solution, but are pretty well defined or characterized in nature, whereas a project has no one right solution and results in many different unique outcomes with different characteristics. Often focused on one discipline and problem-based learning, and it's typically shorter in duration with specific learning steps along the way. If you think back to Metropolitan, which we'll talk about briefly, we laid out the elements of what we expected at the end. We provided the tools, the controllers, the wire, and then lessons along the way for networking and wiring I/O and programming in the easy I/O environment, et cetera, to help guide to a result, a defined end result. That's a pretty complex problem-based learning experience, but still a problem. In project-based learning, they're typically multidisciplinary, which forces the collaborative effort between students, the communication effort between students, the 21st century skills, with general learning waypoints or check-in points, which we'll do along the way as you develop your PBL over the next 3 days, and then resulting in authentic, real-world solutions to problems, or an offered solution to a problem. Addressing a complex problem or challenge or question which drives active learning and inquiry along the way. There's a lot in this slide. Should we stop for a minute? Any questions for clarity about the difference between problem-based and project-based learning? Okay, good. So problem-based learning has found a lot of application in medical schools. Starting in the 1960s, McMaster University of Health Sciences was looking for a way to excite students and involve students, and they instituted problem-based learning in their medical school, in medical prep school. And they had such solid results in developing, clinical analysis skills in their students that med schools all over the United States and internationally started using problem-based clinical case studies or scenarios as part of their learning strategy to instruct medical students. And so it gained wide acceptance and use there, and now it's used pervasively in medical schools and case studies, and we will share in the Google Drive, which we set up for you, some studies that kind of explain the resistance to institutions of PBL in med schools and how they got over that and how it became widespread. Yes, sir.
So, one quick question. How many of you had an HVAC program at your school? Okay, that's kind of what I thought. How many of you have participated a little bit in teaching in that type of a program? Good. How many of you taught troubleshooting as one of the things you did? And how did you do it? You took them out in the lab, you made the equipment not work, and you made them solve it, right? That's problem-based learning. That's a great example of it in our field that we can relate to. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Let's talk about student engagement for a moment, and then we'll get into the elements, again, of project-based learning. I don't know if many of you have heard of this survey. It's one of the largest surveys that students take in community college. It is the largest survey in the United States with about 600,000 responses per year. It's run by the University of Texas at Austin. And it was set up by their community college leadership program in 2001 and run by Kay McClinney, who's a national figure in higher education. Anyways, each year they gain information to provide information about effective educational practices and engagement strategies in community colleges, because this is a touch point, a very important touch point for colleges and how they're measured, because we know that engagement leads to retention and better results and outcomes of student learning. And some of their findings in a 2007 report, which will also be on the Google Drive, which you can read, is that engagement matters to retention and completion. And there's a strong recurrent theme in findings from the CCSSE survey that community colleges students are far more likely to be engaged in the classroom than outside of the classroom. And the report says that 84% of community college students have no extracurricular activities outside of the classroom. So the only way you can impact those students in your community or technical colleges is in the classroom with innovative pedagogical methods. And they propose PBL to do that, and I wanted to share that with you. The critical elements of project-based learning now. We talked a little bit more about problem-based, but project-based learning typically is going to be a little bit longer, again, resulting in unique work products, probably a little bit more planning on the front end from an instructor's perspective. But these are the elements that you'll see in the template that we share with you this afternoon. You want to identify a complex problem, question, or challenge to pose to the students to encourage them to get out and engage in active learning throughout the project. You want it to be an authentic, real-world project or problem that you present to the students that drives that inquiry and motivates them to provide a solution. Okay. You want to provide student voice and choice. So we're going to provide to you, in modeling this, a choice about what kind of project you want to design for your group, right? That's good practice in project-based learning in general, is that you provide participants that choice and voice in what they want to do and pursue. You provide an opportunity for reflection, and you engage in cycles of feedback and revision, and then share the unique public product. And typically, that unique public product will be open to the, obviously to the public, but then what we've done, and I know what Mark has done, I've had a chance to look at his complex project-based learning approach at Delaware Tech, and maybe he'll share that with the group, is that the participants, the industry advisory councils members sometimes, will be in that public presentation and provide an assessment of the quality of communication, the quality of the product, the quality of their perception of the skills that the students are demonstrating, which are connected to the project. And that's really good practice when it comes to PBL. Yes, Mark?
One thing I'd like to add is that when you start on this project-based, going in, if you're not a little anxious or a little scared, you're not risking enough. Okay, so you've got to go in with that attitude of, it's kind of scary because you don't know what you're going to find.
That's right. Is anybody scared?
Yeah.
I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. Bob's scared. No, but it's always part of it. That's exactly right. Students will push back because of that static mentality that hey, I want to be served. You're supposed to teach me. You're supposed to provide all the solutions. Why am I having to create stuff, you know? There's always that angst whenever you start this. But it's very interesting. My experience with it is as you get into it, the students get so motivated and geared up. It is incredible, yeah. Every time we've done it at GPTC, it's been a great experience. And Robert, I know you keep doing it there as well. And would you agree? I mean, students get engaged, motivated, activated. So it is a good strategy. It just takes time at the front end.
Completely blasé to totally engaged in a matter of a couple of weeks.
Yeah, yeah. How are we doing on time? We're good? Okay. So let's just use the Metropolitan Community College BAS workshop last year as a case study for good, complex, problem-based learning and go through the elements of that. When we set that up, and when Robert and I started talking about the elements of that BAS workshop, we wanted to start with the end in mind. So what did we want the participants of that workshop to be able to know, do, understand at the conclusion of the workshop? And what we came up with is that we wanted the participants to be able to wire the standard inputs and outputs found in the building automation systems world. So we put a lot of effort into that in instructing the basics, and then made the participants really execute that. We wanted them to be able to program a controller to a given sequence of operation. If you remember, we even opened up the sequence of operation to input from the participants to try to define what it is that we were going to wind up with at the end. Remember, student voice and choice kind of reflected there. We wanted all of the controllers to be networked and share information for a global variable. If you remember the outside air temperature point, we tried to share across a network. And so we provided instruction about networks. We provided instruction about how you connect these together and give them independent addresses, et cetera, et cetera. And then create a lesson plan to take home and to use as a result of that of that project. And I'm going to turn it over to Robert.
So I want to point out one quick item. We skipped a step between where that slide is and where we really should start. You need to start with you're dealing with project-based or problem-based learning. You have to start off with a problem. You know, you can come up with your learning outcomes if you like. Sometimes your learning outcomes will dictate the problem. Sometimes your problem will dictate the learning outcomes or project. At our workshop in Omaha, we dictated the problem of controlling a mixed air damper control, something we hadn't touched yet. We'd done a lot of digital type control, not a lot of analog. So that's why we got a little bit more in depth on the programming, the networking, why we had to share that outside air point, because we were dealing with mixed air temperature controls, which needs that particular input.
We wanted to know the audience. This was, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. And what's your name?
My name's Doug.
Doug, okay.
Robert, you stole my thunder as we were sitting here talking about project or problem-based learning, and I wasn't at the training event in Omaha. We have commercial air handlers with mixed air capabilities, and mauling this around, that was something I was thinking about initially doing as a project. Even though y'all did this in Omaha, is that something if the group I'm in decides to venture into this, can we work towards that?
Absolutely. There's no reason you couldn't. Remember, student choice, student voice. You're going to be the ones who are going to decide what your group wants to develop. So if that's what you want to develop, that's great. If you want to go for a more open project and say we have a space that needs temperature controls in it, then that's up to you.
Thank you so much.
They're working on it.
One thing about Omaha was we wanted to know our audience, and this was a challenge for us, but typically you want to know what the skill level is of your students or the attendees in this case. What's the variability in skill level, the number of participants, the specific physical limitations or the style of learning, et cetera, et cetera. In Omaha, that was highly variable. We had 40 participants there. Some were experts in control. Some had never wired a point before. So that was a challenge. Mostly instructors, some managers, some neophytes were in attendance there. But that has to be taken into consideration. You want to challenge the students or attendees with the project or problem beyond the level of any one participant, particularly if it's project-based learning. You want to really promote that collaborative communication piece and diffuse experience among the participants, among the groups. We talked about that this morning. Some of you are experienced curriculum developers. You should pair up in your groups with people who have never done that before. Some of you, if you're pursuing building automation, some of you are experts. Some of you are just getting into starting programs, perhaps. You want to pair up with varied skill sets in your group so that you can collaborate, communicate, and so that, exhibit the best practices in PBL experience. Robert, you want to talk about how we did that at MCC?
Absolutely. So we started off with, as Brian said, a complex problem. Complex problems aren't going to be solved by a single person. Just like our life out in the real world, we're teaching students to be able to go and work for contractors, whether it's electrical or HVAC or building automation, or even sustainability on the energy auditing front. You're still going to have to work with contractors. You're still going to have to collaborate with others. One of the skill sets that Peter specifically called out in his presentation for 2020 top skills was social skills, that ability to collaborate with others. So at Omaha, we broke down into teams. We had about 3 to 4 people per team, though we did have groups as big as 5 and as small as 2 to kind of help be a little bit diverse, because there were people who, walking into that workshop, we knew were going to be able to just sit down and do it. Not most of the participants, but we did have a few, and those are overachievers that we had to make sure that we had an extended goal for. That was the networking side. The base goal was to be able to wire up the points, or the physical devices and program it. But the extended goal was the networking portion. Not unimportant, but it's one of those reach goals. That was one lesson. Maybe your next lesson moves on into networking, that sort of idea. Sure. So one of the things that has to be present in both problem-based and project-based learning is inquiry. You have to provide a really high-level survey of what's going on and let the students take over and run with it. We're doing that in this workshop by saying, hey, you're going to develop a problem or project-based learning exercise. Bye. And I'm joking about that, but I'm serious. Project-based and problem-based learning is throwing a student into the deep end. Now, hopefully you've done some scaffolding previously so that they're not going to just totally sink like a rock to the bottom, but they are going to need to struggle with this. They're going to need to learn how to learn. That's one of those other skills that Peter brought up for 2020, is being able to ask the questions and go find the resources. Sometimes you're that resource as the instructor. Sometimes you point them at a document that says, okay, I understand your question, why don't you read this? Or where do you find documentation about an item? Maybe we go to the manufacturer's website, something along those lines. And that's what we did in Omaha, is we gave you a general problem, kind of stood back and let you run with it. We as a group decided some specifics about it, some agreed upon things like our sequence of operations. And then we went out in the lab and started doing it. And for those of you who were in that lab, how many of you had no problems while we were there? I see no hands. Okay, Bob raised his hand. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. But yeah, the people with the fewer problems were the overachievers, the people who when they walked in, we knew that student's going to be a problem. He's going to get bored, and then he's going to cause problems, or they are going to cause problems. So we want to avoid that situation, so you always have to have that room for growth. That's that extended goals. And one of the other things that you run into and is part of that process of inquiry is traps. Those things that you know the student is going to have an issue with before they walk in because it's something you haven't taught them about or haven't specified to them in the past. And that's one of those particular learning opportunities. Hey, I wired it all up. Why doesn't it work? I don't know. You figure it out. In Omaha, one of those traps was specifically on the wiring side about how we provide power to different devices, how we switch power on a controller. And that gets in a little bit further into the weeds than for our discussion right now, but you get the idea behind that. You all can think of a specific pitfall on whatever project you've done out in the field somewhere that you came across it, you weren't expecting it, you fell in the pitfall, and you had to claw your way out and learn. You had to struggle. Now, we don't want to dig the 20-foot deep man trap with spikes at the bottom. We don't want that. We want something that the student can fall in, pick themselves up, and climb out of. You want to create a little bit of frustration, not to the point where they just give up and say, okay, I'm done.
You want that authentic project or problem. You want to make the project as real world as possible, specifically if it is a project. John Dewey said, education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. I love that quote because we all learn how to read and write, well, hopefully all of us, most of us, before we even understand what it is, what the learning process is. We're just immersed in it, right? So the best learning, as Dewey used to say, is that which is applied, and particularly in a social environment. And I always like to go back to him when I think about project-based learning because he's one of the founders of project-based learning. You use real-world tools, methods, and standards as part of that authenticity of the project. At the MCC workshop, the project was to program, as Robert said, an economizer very common control in HVAC controls based on a group of defined parameters. Attendees also had to create their own cables and their own ends. That's another skill that you have to do in the field as a controls technician. So we went through that. We talked about it and made each of the students get their glasses on and get down there with the wires and make that work. And then we tested the cables. Attendees had to share information over a network that they created to make the project work as well. And we had variable results with that, but we did go through the exercise.
So we've called it out a couple of times already. Students make the decisions. You don't, you start with a project and an end goal in mind. You know, you have to have a functioning system. But how the students get there needs to be up to them. If you're dictating how they get there step by step, then it's no longer project-based learning. Chances are it's not even really problem-based learning. You've just moved the lecture from the classroom to the lab. Okay? So students need to be able to make their own choices. They need to be able to make a left turn when you expected them to make a right turn, which, believe me, can get challenging really fast. You will find some smart aleck student in project-based learning that figures out a way to circumvent your entire project because they found a video on YouTube that showed them exactly how to solve this problem, and you're going to stand up there going, because that's the nature of the beast. Sometimes students will take unexpected routes. More often than not, if you're laying out a good project, they're going to go off into la-la land for a few minutes and come back and realize, well, that train of thought didn't go anywhere. That idea didn't go. So they learn from it. That's part of the advantages to letting them make decisions is they're going to learn the way that is best for them as individual students or as groups of students. As long as they come out having learned something and accomplished the goal on the project, they will have learned a lot, actually. A lot more than they will have expected, possibly more than you anticipated. But you can't be locked down with exactly how it needs to go. If that's your plan walking in, you need to figure out a different plan. Reflections for opportunities for reflection. One of the things that we did in the Omaha workshop is after about an hour or two in the lab, we took a break. We took a 15-minute break. We had a drink. We wandered back to the classroom. We had some networking time. And this gave everybody an opportunity to stop, get their head out of the game of exactly what they're doing, to mull over whatever problem that they were stumbling on, whatever new thing that they learned so that they could sit and remember it a little bit. If you don't provide these opportunities for reflection, then it's just like you're out in the field and you've got the boss breathing down your neck. You've got to get it done, you've got to get it done, you've got to get it done. And yes, it does happen in the real world, no doubt about it. It happens in the classroom. But if you give students the opportunity to reflect, they're going to have more time to absorb the information. They're going to have time to think about it, time to realize what they just accomplished. And every victory in project-based and problem-based learning, doesn't matter how small, is a victory, and it energizes the students. So the more time they have to realize that they did something, the better.
So you want to share the results with the community and get critical feedback. Resulting problem or project should be shared and celebrated with the community. And this is a good marketing opportunity too. I know when we used to, 10 minutes you said, Ted? Okay. When we used to do this, we would hold it in our conference center. We'd invite the industry board members and make it a marketing tool, an engagement tool, not just for our students, but also for our community of partners. And then that feedback opportunity is huge. At MCC, the elements of the project were shared by the nature of the project itself. It became self-evident when we tried to pull up an outside air temperature global point on somebody's controller, whether it worked or not. And so there's an element of pressure there too that keeps people in motion. and we witnessed all that in Omaha. The groups reported out the results at the conclusion of the workshop. Expert-created solutions were provided as examples. There were some who got every element of the project to work, and so we celebrated their success and talked about how they got there. And then feedback was given to each group on request during the project by the entire learning community and also at the end. So there are those waypoints, right, or the check-in points, which we'll do as well along the way the next 3 days, about how you're coming along on your projects or problems. And then actually one more topic on that I'll share. I'll kind of give you a precursor to this. I guess it was a couple years ago, Dr. Deb Hall shared with us Kahoot It, which is an immediate feedback app that a lot of you I know are using, and just it's free. We'll utilize that at the end of this workshop as you present to the group your project plan and the elements of that. The group here will rate your performance on communication, on delivery, right? Do you feel the pressure? Actually, I'm looking forward to that part because I'm looking forward to what you come up with. But actually, we're going to celebrate, the products of your work, and then at the same time, give you some critique and feedback about how you can improve the delivery of this to your students. So we'll be sitting in the audience. Everybody will be sitting in the audience except those presenting their project plan as students. Okay, how do we respond as students to what you're presenting? Does it excite us? Do we understand what you're presenting? Do we push back a little bit? We don't want hecklers, but this is what you'll get when you present a project. You're going to get all those things when you present a good project to your students. So we'll model that in your report outs at the end as well. And then finally, a germane topic, we've kind of talked about this with authenticity of the project itself, but just revisiting it. The topic of instruction must be of interest and meet the needs of the audience. You want to find out what the attendees or students want, what are their pains, how can the instruction make their lives easier. At the MCC workshop, we designed around the needs identified by surveys that we've gotten from you and the collective group of Best Center colleges after each workshop about what it is that you want. And so we tried to model that in our workshop last summer. And then finally, instructor as a performer. Robert, do you want to talk about that one?
Absolutely. So up here with Brian, we've been back and forth. We're, as all of you know, as instructors, you have to be a performer. You have to believe in what you're teaching the students, right? You have to be a little bit funny. You have to be poignant, because otherwise you're just going to stand up there and drone on, and you lose the students, right? Project-based and problem-based learning is no different. You still have to be engaging with the students. You won't be up in front of them all the time. You're going to be more standing beside them, looking over their shoulder, offering suggestions, answering their questions individually, or if somebody falls into one of those inquiry traps, maybe you do go up to the board and say, okay, I noticed a lot of people are running into this particular issue. Let's talk about it as a group. But you are a performer. You are a guide by the side in project and problem-based learning. It's not the sage on the stage dynamic.
Sure. I think this is just about it, but balancing the challenge of the project or problem with the ability of the learners is kind of self-evident. At MCC, again, a highly variable group of attendees with various skills or lack thereof. Levels of project completion were set with the base level met by all, and as Robert said, we set a higher level of outcomes for those overachievers and overperformers. Networking and sharing of global information for control was achieved by some, as we previously mentioned, and we kept the higher achieving groups reaching for more, and we'll try to do that here as well. You'll see when we present the project plan, not to overwhelm you, but it is pretty well built out. And there's a lot of stuff you can do in there, including thinking about assessments. So we think that it will take your group's, concerted effort to meet the minimum outcomes of this project. But some of you will do that. Maybe a lot of you will do that. what's the next step? Well, how are you going to assess? How are you going to build a rubric for assessment? How are you going to handle the students in formative assessments and summative assessments at the end, et cetera? For you overachievers, we'd like to see some of that and see some of those work products. So hopefully we can keep you engaged through the whole project and really celebrate the results on Friday when we present those. And just a couple pictures here. A picture says 1,000 words, and this to me says engagement. If you look at the folks in this photo, everybody's engaged. They're having a good time. They're developing logic in the Sedona environment there. Everybody's moving. That's an indicator of good, engaged, project-based learning.
And you'll notice one of the other things in that picture. Notice, for those of you not familiar, this gentleman's name is Bruce from up in Seattle. Portland. Sorry. And he is talking specifically to Larry. That's one thing that you run into in project-based learning very significantly, is that the students will teach each other. You will have some of those overachieving students that will lend a hand to the students who are struggling a little bit more. Foster that, nurture it. That's a good thing, because that's exactly how it happens in the real world, isn't it?
And a couple other pictures here this is one of the traps, okay? So if you look, I don't know if you can see this dotted line here. We didn't share with the participants whether we had a common tracing, electrical tracing within the board, if it was, we had some common connection points electrically in the controller or not. And we knew when groups would come to us and ask that question, those who had gotten to that point. So good design of problem or project-based learning includes some of these inquiry traps where the student has thought about a particular issue and either surmounted it or not, and same thing, talking about good terminations and some of the things that we witnessed as far as problems along the way that folks ran into or didn't even realize they ran into, but that we witnessed as guides on the side as we went through the project. And I think that's it. There's some references there. As I mentioned, we're going to share all these reports and or slideshow, et cetera, on a Google Drive this year. So you can pull all this down, both during the experience and when you go back to your home institutions. And then we'll throw in your presentations and projects that you design into that Google Drive as well. So went through a lot of stuff. Are there any questions or clarifications for Robert or myself about the general nature of PBL? Yes?
You mentioned again that you could identify some of the high achievers before you put them in the group. Did you put one in each group, or did you put them all together?
We tried to diffuse them throughout the groups. We didn't want to have high achievers together, that were just outperforming everybody. Yeah, definitely we wanted to diffuse those skill sets among the groups.
Know something about your students.
Right.
In advance.
We did. A lot of them we did. Yeah, not all of them, but most of them we did have previous experience. But just like you would, when you introduce these projects, typically they're going to be capstone exercises or at the end of a course. You'll have a good handle on the students and what they're capable of at that point. Good question. Any other questions?
The
Yeah.
second year classes, I use that for project-based.
Yeah,
So I already know the students from the first year.
right. And
Good idea where they're at.
exactly. At GPTC, most of our projects come in that second year when the students have a good base foundational skills well established. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll introduce this project after lunch, and thanks for your time. Okay, so let's jump into this. You should have this document printed out. You can also access it by Google Drive, and ideally, as you break up into work groups, you'll use the Google Drive. We have it in PDF and Word, and you can start filling it out in those blocks that we have here. So we try to set up some waypoints along the way as you break into teams and develop this exercise, whatever it is you choose to do, and have report outs each day. So today at 4:30, we'll start with some of the things, and we'll go through them that we'd like to hear back from you as far as the title, the institutions, who's involved in the project, in developing the project, et cetera, et cetera. But let's just start at the beginning and go through the sections that you'll need to fill out over the next 3.5 days as part of the exercise. Obviously, the first is the title of the project. I guess even before that, how many here are looking at doing a building automation systems exercise? Just a show of hands, please. Okay, not too many, about 8. How about some kind of mechanical systems exercise? A few, okay. What about energy or energy efficiency? Bob, you're doing everything. Okay. Sustainability? Anybody? Okay. That gives us an idea. Okay. So as we go through this, at the end of this presentation, we'll want to break up into those groups. And we have some space over here, so if some of you would like to have a separate space to work, we've got this room available to us. And the rest, I guess we'll just... What was that? Does it have a heater? It's colder in there than it is in here, so maybe we won't see too many of you over there. Mechanical systems group in there, fix it, please. So, okay, so the title of the project, you'll report on that at 4:30 today. The institution and the authors, and we'll report back on that as well. That's easy. Okay, the focus of the project, whether it be energy efficiency, sustainability, building automation, mechanical systems, commissioning, or other. It's pretty much open to anything that the Best Center addresses, so any of those topics are fine. Thanks, Robert. Okay, now the big lift for this afternoon is going to be selecting both the project goals or desired project outcomes. Think of programmatic level outcomes here. How many of you are familiar with that term, programmatic level outcomes, PLOs, sort of? Okay. So these are the things that when somebody finishes a program or finishes a learning experience that you want them to be able to do. Okay, and then there are learning objectives that support those outcomes. And the learning objectives, which we're going to state here in just a moment as well, usually start with verbs, usually some kind of Bloom's taxonomy verbs. For those of you who've been to other workshops, we always talk about Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm the guy who's always bringing it up. So I know it's kind of anathema to some of you, but Bloom's taxonomy is the place to go when you want to start a learning objective with some kind of action verb, right? And we've provided a link here, a pretty good website that gives you the 3 domains of learning in which Blooms operate. Oh, thanks. Actually, let's go back for just a minute. Let me go through that section first, then we'll hit this. So Blooms basically addresses the 3 domains of learning, and we'd like you, as part of setting your learning objectives, to at least have one in each one of those domains of learning. One is cognitive. Think of book learning, right? Another psychomotor, or a fancy way of saying applied hands-on skills, psychomotor domain. And the third, which is often overlooked, is the affective or emotional domain, and there are Bloom's taxonomy verbs that address the affective domain as well, because that's one thing in project-based learning in particular that you have to touch on, is getting those students motivated. It's very important that you select an affective domain Bloom's taxonomy verb. Then within each of those 3 areas, there are levels that demonstrate progression of thinking or skill in those particular domains, or emotion in those particular domains of learning. So for instance, and you'll see this on the Bloom's page in just a minute, and we'll go into a little more depth. In the cognitive domain, you typically start with a knowledge level. That's the lowest level, right? Rote memorization or facts of some sort or another. And then you work your way up through either an evaluation in the old Blooms or a creation phase, where you're actually taking those elements of knowledge, you're breaking them down, reforming them, and then you're coming up with something, the student's coming up with something new, or creating or developing something brand new. That's the highest level in the cognitive domain. And so you'll see in the link there, when you set these learning objectives, you want to start each one with an action verb that's selected from a Bloom's taxonomy domain of learning, okay? We've also provided a tool in the Google Drive that we presented two or 3 years ago now at a workshop, and that is the Excel student learning objective spreadsheet, which makes it very easy to just select from a menu in each one of the domains your verb. It just makes it easier, you know, to go through that exercise. And we'll show you that after we go through the expectations of the assignment. You're free to use that or add to it, whatever you want to do with it. So under the learning objectives, which again is going to be reported out on by your groups this afternoon, you want to consider the stated goals or desired outcomes of the project and the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed by the students to realize those project goals, and then set those learning objectives that you anticipate as part of the project, starting with those Bloom's taxonomy verbs, okay? And there'll be 6 to 8 of those. Remember, in project-based learning, this is just what you expect as an instructor for them to learn. Typically, they're going to learn a whole lot of other things that you did not expect as part of your PBL experience with the students, okay? We're just trying to capture the elements that they will definitely need to demonstrate to be able to perform the project, or in the case of the Metropolitan experience, we knew the areas in which the attendees would have to have competency in order to meet the objectives of the assignment in that experience. And so we covered those along the way. Okay. How many of you are not familiar with Bloom's? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but does somebody or anybody want to go into it just a little bit more or not? Yes, no? Okay, let's just go there for just a minute, Robert, just for a minute. Okay, so this webpage, individual, I forget who's, this is about the best site that I found. You see a lot of, if you put in a search online, you see a lot of different trees and pyramids and et cetera, but this page really brings it all together and explains each one. If you want to hit on the cognitive domain, and then scroll down just a little bit. Okay, so here are the levels, starting with the lowest to the highest. So he shows you knowledge, comprehension, application, et cetera, and then at the bottom of each one of those sections provides keywords that show that the level of learning within this domain, if you started with describe or define or identify certain things, that would indicate that a student is performing at that level of competency. If you go down to analysis, which is getting into the higher level abilities, keywords are analyze, break down, compare, contrast, diagram, et cetera, okay? So you kind of get where we're going there. And then if we can go all the way to evaluate, Robert. That's the highest level in the old Bloom's, is to appraise, compare, conclude, critique, evaluate, interpret, justify, et cetera. Okay, so that's Bloom's. Now if we want to go back to the psychomotor. Okay, this has a different set. I think there's 7 levels in psychomotor, starting with perception, the ability to use sensory cues to guide motor activity. This is where an instructor might be demonstrating how to braze in a laboratory, and a student perceives that and watches and kind of starts to lay down some understanding there, and then going through from set guided response all the way up to origination creates a new movement or a unique, I guess, pattern of time and motion that student would come up with themselves, makes it unique to themselves, you know, does it in their own particular way, almost like creating something new, but in the psychomotor domain, in the hands-on domain, okay? So verbs that would indicate competency at that level would be to build, combine, construct, create, design, originate, et cetera, okay? So does everybody understand how we use this page then to select action verbs that indicate a certain level of performance within your student learning objectives as part of this assignment? Any questions about what we're looking for there? Okay. Good to go, Robert. Okay, so the link's in the page there, and you'll just fill that out in the template. Okay, this one also will be reported out on today at 4:30, but some of this, it will be done after you leave the workshop or when you go back to your home institutions, hopefully while you're here. But we'd like you to look for alignment to your existing programs at your home institutions. And hopefully, if you're selecting a project based on mechanical systems, you would have a mechanical systems or HVAC program at your institution. Or if you're doing something in building automation, you would have some kind of building automation program at your institution. Same with energy efficiency or renewables or anything like that. We want you to start thinking about how you would use this back at your home institution. And so hopefully members of your group would have similar programs so you can start to think about how that would be done. And then as homework, when you leave here and go back to your home institutions, we'd like you to crosswalk the elements of this exercise that you develop into your home institution program so you can look and see where it fits nicely as an instructional exercise, and then you can implement it when you go back. Because at the end of the day, for the best center, we are graded or looked at by the NSF and say, how much of the stuff that we do here at the workshops do you actually go home and implement at your home institutions? So this is a step in that direction, okay? On the collective group report outs, the top 3 or 4 elements, bullet points of that particular requirement, like how does this PBL exercise align with an existing program of your institution? What courses would it be delivered in? Is this a capstone PBL experience, et cetera? Those 3 in particular can be reported out on as a group. But then the other ones, crosswalking learning objectives to existing learning objectives in your program of choice back home, or how specifically will this project improve attainment of learning objectives at your home institutions. We'd like you to either do that while you're here, if you have time, or go back to your home institutions and then shoot that over to us so we know how you're implementing this back home, okay?
And that's one of the most important things about this particular exercise is we want it to be useful for you. So do customize this to what's going to work for you at your institution. Within your groups, you're going to run into plenty of commonalities, so it should work together pretty well because most of us are trying to run for similar goals. But once you get, especially once you leave here, do form it so that it is most useful for you and your situation. We want this to be useful for you, not necessarily for everybody else. Somebody else will be able, hopefully be able to take a look at it and gain inspiration from it, or maybe pull some parts and pieces for their program that will also fit. But we all know that every institution, every program is a little bit different. So make it fit for your system.
Okay, okay, next, please. Okay, here's where you will get into the real meat of the assignment itself. And this will be due tomorrow at 4:30 for the report out. And there are specific elements here. We'll start with the presentation of the PBL assignment to the students. This is part of, on Friday morning when you do your final report out, this is part of what you'll present to us as a collective group. And this is what we'll use Kahoot! To evaluate how well you perform and present that assignment to us as a collective group, and then we'll give you that feedback. But so some of the questions here, how will you first expose students to this project? Think about that. It's very important because remember, one of the most important things about PBL is exciting students, motivating students to learn and strive to answer that guiding question, right? That sustaining inquiry, the active learning. You got to motivate, you got to be an actor or an actress for the students when you present the assignment itself. Okay, how will you handle student resistance to the exercise? You always get this in PBL. You know, I don't know what I want to do. You know, why are you making me, you know, you're the teacher, you're supposed to teach me. So how will you address that if you get some of that feedback or pushback? How will you support student choice while maintaining realistic project goals? So some of your students might say, well, I'm going to build a new space shuttle, right? It's not too realistic. So how are you going to really hone that motivation, but make it realistic as well? And then how will student groups be selected Is there a minimum, maximum number to each group? What about group dynamics? It's very important. How do you pair up students to be effective with one another where one's not doing all the work or there's personal conflict? You know, give that some thought as well, and then you'll fill out the empty space there as part of this assignment. Next. Okay, sustained inquiry. I've bolded this out because this is very important to think about. Some of you might think this is maybe a stated goal of the project or a student learning outcome, but it's actually different. And it's not always necessarily specifically stated or presented to students, but it's something you have to understand when you're presenting the project to them. What is going to be the driving question, problem, or challenge? You know, they're going to have a specific project goal individually as part of their project, but what's the ultimate goal of your project to keep them motivated in pursuing that, right? What's going to sustain that inquiry? It could be a question, a problem, or a challenge. It has to be multidisciplinary and provide the latitude for students to select a project within that. Okay, so this is something that you really have to create there's no right answer here, but you really have to think about what that's going to be for your group. What's going to sustain that inquiry for the students? Or what space are you going to make available to them to have a project which excites them and gets them involved in that sustained inquiry? And if you remember back to our presentation this morning, these are the key elements of project-based learning we covered. This is one of them. Sustained inquiry, which drives active learning. Learning during the PBL exercise, how will the foundational knowledge be delivered by the instructor and/or guest lecturer that provide the base level? And this could be part of courses they've already had in your program, depending on where this exercise shows up. This could be a guest lecturer that comes in to talk about commissioning or retro commissioning or energy audits or whatever, you know, depends on your project. What specific learning will be left to the students as part of their active learning process? How will the instructor act as a guide on the side instead of a sage on the stage providing all the answers when students come to you and say, what do you think about this? Am I going in the right direction here? What kind of feedback do you have? You know, you don't want to give them all the answers and take away that sustained inquiry, active learning process. Okay. Yeah, let's.
Also here at the Guide by the Side section in combination with realistic projects, this is one of the very useful points to help prevent project creep. You know, we've all been on projects where somebody decides to change what the end goal is on us halfway through and we stumble and stutter and go, we can't do that. Or sometimes you'll run into one of the overachiever type students who decide that they're going to build a spaceship in the middle of taking control of an air handler. This is one of those times where you can really kind of dial in and help them to focus on what needs to be accomplished versus what is maybe some bells and whistles that they don't need. But if you've got time at the end, maybe we can work on that spaceship.
You want to continue with the ideation thing?
Sure. So the ideation phase is one of the important spots where they have to create their own ideas. You know, they have to come up with their solution for it. No, I'm off balance. Nope. Sorry, sure.
It just a space for them to ask questions, for an instructor or others to provide feedback and revise their ideas. What role is the instructor going to provide during that process? Because again, you don't want to be guiding the project yourself. So give that some thought about where will those waypoints be, those check-in points with your groups to make sure that they're making progress, but not to provide all the answers to them along the way. And this continues on that thread, revision, feedback, refinement. As the project develops, what are those waypoints along the way? Describe how time for reflection or instructor check-ins are included. If the project hits a stopping point, consider how that might be resolved. What about group conflict or underperforming group members? Sometimes that could be addressed internally by giving other group members some latitude in providing feedback on other group members' performance and then weighing that into the grading process. Could be done that way. There are other solutions to that, yes.
I think it's important to do this. Don't pick soft skills.
Absolutely.
Are they doing this project for a customer? How are they going to interact with the customer? What's going to be the deliverables to the customer? Feedback. You got to have them keep that in mind all the way through the project. That helps keep them focused.
Yeah, that's getting to a scenario-based learning, project-based learning, really, where you almost immerse them also in the communicative nature of a project, working with various contractors, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that has a big effect on the effective part of that.
Absolutely. Bob?
You can't forget the bucket boy speech.
You can't what?
Forget the bucket boy speech.
The bucket boy speech. What's the bucket boy speech?
Don't pay attention, you're gonna carry a bucket the rest of your career.
Okay, that's a good, okay. There you go. There you go. I know you do that with your students. I've seen it. Yeah, that's good. We're gonna look for that element of your project, Bob. Bucket boy. That's good. If the project goals are met early, is there a second level of project performance included in the assignment for overachievers? Okay. Okay. Can you scroll down a little bit? Okay. The project presentation. A key element that we went over this morning is that public presentation of the work products. So we'd like you to describe a plan for presenting the resultant projects as part of what you develop over the next couple days. What does that look like? Who is it in front of? What kind of grading consequences does that have for the students? How does that continue to motivate the students, knowing that they have a deadline? I mean, that's real world stuff now. We have to respond to deadlines. So as part of your project, students should have to respect deadlines, and then there should be a consequence to that, a public consequence to that, that also acts as a motivator for the students. So how does that look as part of your project development? Okay. How will you promote the participation in the public presentation event and make it a big event for students, instructors, and administrators alike? These can be wonderful, for those of you who've done it, wonderful opportunities to bring together the community of practice, the learners, the educators, the administrators, the supporting organizations or companies or whatever, to kind of celebrate that learning. That's very powerful on a lot of fronts. So is that part of your project design? Describe how the project presentation can act as a marketing and awareness tool for the program and or prospective students, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, next. Okay, almost done. This seemed like a lot of work? Yeah, it's a little bit of work. Repeatability, improvements. The best project-based or problem-based learning experiences are those that can be gone through cycle after cycle. So how often might you expose students to this PBL? Is it once a year? Is it twice a year? Is it every term? And how will you improve upon the PBL that you design? So what's the plan for gathering feedback and then implementing that into future iterations of the PBL itself? So we'd like you to think about that and fill out that section as well. Okay. Finally, assessing the project. And this will be reported out on the final day, so on Friday morning. And some of you might not get here. This is kind of for I don't want to say it's for the overachievers. We'd like everybody to get there. And we know you're not all overachievers. Well, maybe you will be if you all finish this. That's a lot. But the assessing PBL is a very important part of the experience. So how will you incorporate assessment as part of this experience for your students? PBL is often multifaceted. It often involves rubrics because some of the characteristics of PBL are not easily assessed in just a pen and paper test, right? Some of them are soft skills, as Mark mentioned. Some of them are communication skills, which are soft skills, critical thinking. I mean, how do you assess all that? The best way to do it is to find examples of good student performance, average student performance, and poor student performance. Look at the indicators for that and then put it as part of a rubric and apply that rubric equally to the student groups. And oftentimes, this might be like a communication rubric, which we've shown a sample of from Penn State. It could be how well are the students communicating their project to a group of industry folks. You know, are they using lingo properly? Are they making good eye contact? Are they using proper English, or whatever it is? We'd like you to, if you get into this assessment, we'd like you to develop some sort of rubric that can capture performance at that end product public presentation. Okay? What role does a public audience or individual team members, what role might they have in assessing the performance? Construct your own rubric of assessment for the key learning objectives of the assignment as well to be employed by the instructor. So as an instructor, what are the indicators of a student meeting those learning objectives that you identified early on in this assignment? So if there's 6 learning objectives, what are your indicators that show the students actually perform those? And then how could the best assessments feed back into students? You provide that to students, not as a rank order, you did well, you did poorly, whatever, but with some kind of feedback that they can employ and improve on. So assessment for learning, really, is what I'm trying to say here. So think about that. If you're developing an assessment plan, not just for some kind of draconian ABC, you know, rank ordering grading system, which our system is kind of founded on, but think about going a little further and using the assessment or assessment tools for learning, for student learning. That's very important when you're developing an assessment plan. And finally, have you considered both formative and summative assessments? So along those waypoints, is there a way to capture student performance or progression towards the goal? And at the very end, how do you capture overall performance of the project itself? And then, will there be a self-reflection opportunity for students at the end of the exercise? And if so, please describe. That's it. That's it. You should be done in 2 hours. So, and this is great, because this is the feedback you get when you present a project to students. You hear this moaning and groaning, and well, it's too much. We can't do it. So, Mark, go ahead.
Can I get a beer one time?
Yeah, you can get beer. Bob's leading the charge tonight. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So if I was to implement this in a classroom setting, would I give the students the same document and have them fill it out for their project?
No, this is really for you to design a space for students to perform a project. This is kind of an instructors only, behind the scenes structural kind of document. What you'd present to students, however, is more what you'll be presenting out on to us as a group on Saturday, Friday. Usually we finish Saturdays, but which is kind of a subset of this. It's kind of like the student learning objectives, the goal, the timeline of the project, you know, the grading components, which students are always interested in. How will I be assessed part of the project? That's what you'll provide to students.
So this organize the whole stage of the project.
Absolutely. This is for an instructor to develop a PBL experience, Rob.
This, the template that Brian has created for us here is more to help us organize our thinking, because developing project-based and even problem-based learning activities is something that normally takes a significant amount of time and a lot of work put into it. That's why we are grouping up into teams so that we can work together on this, kind of a divide and conquer. And we're using this template as some scaffolding to help guide our thoughts, you know, kind of, build us up a little bit there, so that we're not trying to start by inventing a new wheel type thinking.
Thank you.
Other questions so far?
Okay, let's go into the report out for Saturday, the template for that on Friday.
So that is the single sheet printed in portrait mode. Says PBL report out at workshop conclusion.
So on Friday morning, we will have been through 2 or 3 kind of waypoint check-ins or report outs, one today, one tomorrow, and I guess Friday's the last time. So really 2 check-ins and then the final report out. So what we'd like you to do, instead of the usual, for those of you who've been here before, we ask you, what's going on at your home institutions, how have you implemented best center resources, et cetera, et cetera. Your whole report out for this workshop is going to be this project that you've created. This project or problem/project, hybrid, whatever. So the first slide we'd like to see on Friday morning is what you'll define today. The title of the project, the institutions, the authors, slide number 1. Slide number 2, those learning objectives that you set today, at least get a baseline of today. They might change by the time you finally report on Friday, but we'd like to see that. The subject areas that they might cover, so if it's sustainability or energy efficiency and it bleeds over into some physics for buildings, whatever it is, we'd like you to list that, and then those 6 to 8 learning objectives, starting with the Bloom's taxonomy verbs, okay, which support, which students will be able to know or do as a result of the PBL exercise. Slide number 3 will be the project presentation, and actually, we talked about it yesterday, it might bleed over into 2 slides because there's a lot of stuff there. So the main guts of that project, okay? So as part of that slide, you'll be presenting to the Best Center audience as if we're students receiving an introduction to this project ourselves, okay? So you want to be exciting. You want to be very clear in the elements of the project, the expectations, the grading components, et cetera. The driving question, problem, or challenge which will sustain the student body during the project, which might be, well, whatever you say, 8 weeks or 4 weeks or a whole term, whatever it is. The length of the project, obviously. The key elements of the project and expectations of the students during the project. All that should be reported out on slide 3 or slide 3 and 4 if it bleeds over into more than just one slide, okay? The timeline of the project will be the next slide, starting with the public presentation date, and that's going to be a relative date. So we obviously don't have exact dates here, but it might be end of term, end of spring term, or whatever it is, whatever you select there. The key milestones and the waypoints and check-ins between students and instructors. Show when the project teams need to be set, the ideation phase completed, the reflection and feedback process portion of the timeline, and just showing on just a basic timeline. You can just kind of show how the project lays out. It shouldn't be that hard to put that one together. The assessment plan for students. Again, some might fully characterize this with rubrics, et cetera, which we'd love to see. Some might not, but whatever you have here as part of that assessment plan, we'd like to see in slide 5. And then finally, a summary slide about your experiences as part of this project over the next 3 days. What did you think about it? What were the frustration points? Did you like your teammates? Would you like to do it again? Whatever you want to say there, right? You're never coming back, whatever it is, or okay. Yes, sir.
These are presented by the team, so there's just one per team.
That one per team, yes, that's right.
And
That's right.
just to be clear, we're not expecting you to do the PowerPoint presentations at our check-ins today and tomorrow. Those are just going to be completely verbal. You come up, give us your 2 cents in 2 minutes or so, and done. That's all we're looking for on those. So don't worry about the PowerPoint until it comes time for Friday. If you want to use the PowerPoint as your notes for when you're doing the check-in, or you want to do them as you go, that's entirely up to you, highly encouraged, but not required. Okay?
You want to address any questions? I'll pull up some other tools you can use. Any questions or clarifications on the report out?
I just have a question about how we're gonna make teams. I have an idea for a project. This is what I was planning to do in the spring anyway, but I hadn't thought out the details at all.
Well, that's perfect timing then, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah, no, I know, but.
So
is
what
there
we're going to do...
Somebody here who likes contemporary controls and wants to make a contemporary controls project.
There you go. So what we're going to do is first we're going to section off into groups. so that we get the groups who want to talk about the same topic material together. So whether you're talking about building automation systems or mechanical systems or commissioning or energy efficiency and sustainability. Those are our general areas that we decided to focus on for this workshop. So hopefully your inclinations will fit into one of those general categories, and we'll first split off into those groups. Then depending on the size of those groups, we may subdivide into smaller groups of about 4 individuals.
So we're gonna split up by general topic first.
General topic, and then we will break off into groups. You may have some general discussion in the main groups before to figure out maybe 2 or 3 of you have something that's going to work really together, good synergy, and so you want to break off into a group. We'll follow that as it needs to go. Thank you for asking that one, Bill. That was a great one. Any other questions so far?
Okay, so if you look on the shared resources part of the Google Drive, there's one in particular that we've used before, and a lot of you I know were not here during that workshop, but it's just a spreadsheet tool that can help you in developing your student learning objectives. Just make it easier because everything's right there. So on the first tab of that, we have the Bloom's domains, and if you scroll down there, you can see all the 3 domains, and then some of the action verbs, and then a link to the Bloom's taxonomy webpage. If you go over to tab number 2, for that particular year, we used it to develop some learning outcomes based on some of the presentations we had up at UC Berkeley National Labs. So we broke each one of those down. This one was, I guess, indoor air quality. We had a number of great presentations that year. And the assignment for which this tool was used is how are you going to take that information that you were presented at the Hill and then use it back at your home institution. So the way this works, if you click on, well, let me just scroll over here a little bit first. I can't see on this one. Okay. Basically, in the cognitive domain, you will see some cells here that have drop-down boxes associated with them. That's not working on this one. There should be a drop-down menu here.
You're not in a functional in Google Drive.
Oh, okay. Got to download it first. Okay. Okay, so basically how this works, if you open up the tool and download it for a fully functional copy of the spreadsheet, you'll see that when you click on define, it comes up with a list of a number of verbs in that domain. You just copy that cell, select the verb, which define is one of them, copy it, and then bring it over here into a list of student learning objectives, and then put some verbiage behind it. You know, it just makes it easier. If you want to use it, you don't have to use it, it just makes it easier. So that's what that's for. There are some other resources in that page, in that Google Drive, that are basically, oh, okay, gotcha. I'm so unfamiliar with Max. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So some of these are just some of the research studies that we talked about earlier today, like Are Students Really Ready to Work? That's a study, the Barrows study about how PBL was incorporated into medical schools, tracking the history of that, which might be of interest to you. There's the Community College Survey of Student Engagement by Kay McClenny and University of Texas, and what that's used for. And that's something you might want to take a look at because that continues to this day. They make recommendations about PBL and how that can act as an engagement tool for retention in the classroom. So if you're trying to make the case for PBL at your home institutions about why you need some release time to develop some of these exercises, that's a great tool because she's a big voice in higher education. She works for the AACC with the AACC very closely. And just about any administrator is going to be familiar with her work, okay? And they're really promoting, and they've actually connected through some of their research the importance of PBL to retention engagement, retention, and persistence in college, which is a huge issue to administrators and colleges at large. So that's in there if you want to take a look at that. And then we have the rubric from Penn State to provide an example for communications assessment. And I think that's just about everything you need to be successful as part of the assignment. Any questions?
Probably a bunch,
Well, we'll be here.
We'll be here. One quick item from Ted is when you're using the Google Drive, please download things from it. Don't save back to the drive when we're doing this, because we do have a lot of access privileges right now on this. So copy things down. If you're not certain that it needs to go back up to the drive, ask. We're happy to help you answer that one.
I tried downloading it, said I had no rights to do so. My access was denied.
So I had to do it with my EDU.
You said what?
It said access was denied, I had no rights to download.
You need to open the access on the document. You need to do it in Google Drive. You have to provide access to everybody.
I'm
Yeah,
going
go to drive.google.com.
No.
Go to your shared.
Google Drive.
Well, y'all.
Yeah.
And the reason I asked, because if you're gonna download it, you've got a thumb drive. It would probably be a good idea to download it to the thumb drive.
Well, I'll tell you what, does somebody have an extra thumb drive? I can circulate one. For those of you who are having problems, I'll just put it all on a thumb drive and circulate it around the room. No problem with that. I guess we'll start with you. Do you want it that way, or you good? Okay.
You know, in case.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Good point.
We had a lot of problems, like in some of my classes, where the students ended up with so much material, they couldn't upload it to Google. And,
Gotcha.
you know, they ended up having to put it on a thumb drive and give it to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the files were too massive.
It hangs up on me sometimes too, honestly, when we were setting this up. But when it works, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? Okay. Hearing none, I think we can break up into the groups now. So how many, show of hands, who was going to work on a building automation systems project? 12. So that sounds like a good 3 groups to me. Okay, so can you raise your hands again, those of you that are going to work on that? Okay, and just identify 3 teammates, or 4 teammates, actually.
Let's break them up into the main groups,
And then they can do that? Okay, okay. Got you what? Got BAS folks all the way to the back, if you would. Back of the bus.
We all know that's where you belong anyway,
Either bus. All buses.
And just so you know, if like, right now, if you look up, there's a copy of Bloom's spreadsheet tool, there's Bloom's spreadsheet tool, and Bloom's spreadsheet tool, it's at XLS. 2 people opened up Bloom's spreadsheet tool and saved it as a Google Doc in there. If you want that file, you better download it, because I may go back in and clean those up, because somebody just accidentally saved it, didn't really mean to. So.
And please, nobody download the assignment, change the assignment, and re-upload the assignment. I know. I shouldn't have said it, right? Now somebody's going to do it. But we will be caught, and there will be an assessment penalty to your group. Okay. Mechanical systems, show of hands, please. Okay, mechanical systems, the cold room.
Mechanical, I can go energy, I'll do whatever. I've been doing automation.
Change it up. I see you looking for experiences.
Let's have a room for now.
Probably should, because it's.
Mechanical system.
5 or 6.
Right?
Okay, how about energy? Energy or energy efficiency. Okay, I see 3 hands. There's your group right there. Okay, wherever you want to meet.
Is it warm right there?
It's not bad up here, but there's a heater. up here, so I guess that's why.
Right now,
I don't know what I'm doing.
Another hand for the energy group, energy efficiency. Okay, those are the folks. 2 or 3 in the back.
And so I guess that means the rest of you are,
Sustainability or commissioning. How many sustainability folks? Sustainability project. Okay, so 2 up in the front.
Kevin, what do you want to work on?
Commissioning or automation?
And how about commissioning? Commissioning? We have one in Robert Kroom in the back, so you guys could pair up. Yeah.
More the better.
And then finally, other. Okay. I think we got everybody.